There we go. But I call it striking at the root because there's a quote I saw on this book that my mom had received. She had it for a long time. And as a kid, I saw this book, and it was a book by Stephen Covey. It's called Spiritual Roots to Human Relations. And on the back of it, there was a quote that said, for every one striking at the root, there are thousands striking at the leaves. And that kind of stuck with me as a teenager, and it has stuck with me into adulthood. And that's kind of the center of what we've been talking about the last three trainings, and we're really going to get into this training, is how do we make sure we're striking at the root, where we're actually being effective in what we're doing. And as a quick side note, we haven't done a whole lot of Google AdWords, not for 10 years. And so we were wanting to do a little bit more in that area. So I had our brothers go through a training. And in the training, the guy talked about he doesn't like the split test on the words of ads, but more on higher level concepts. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because sometimes we get so fixated on these split testing concepts, but we split test on things where we assume we're even in the right ballpark, and we may not even be in the right ballpark. And so it's really important to get to what is the root thing and make sure that we're playing at the root level versus the leaves level if we really want to make a difference. So we're going to talk about how you do that with sales call connection optimization techniques. And just to explain that, I guess we'll just do it this way. How's it? Can you see all the arrows?
See arrows, but nothing else.
That's right. We'll reveal a little bit at a time. Would you say that this is a true statement? It's difficult to find good salespeople?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just you and me that feel that way. In fact, if you are one of the few that is on the Zoom right now, you want to chat in. Do you find it difficult to find good salespeople?
Ryan, I'll say that also, I think most businesses put a little too much on the salespeople because the marketing is terrible, right? Yeah. It's like the sales rep is expected to do the whole job. But in reality, if you're doing marketing right, the sales rep should be answering questions and taking orders.
Yeah. Or at least reaching out to warm leads.
Yep.
Frequently, I mean, there's a number of Fortune 500 companies that are driven purely off of salespeople that do everything. There is an advertising arm that does some awareness, but the salespeople are having to do a lot of work. Yeah. So it's difficult to find good salespeople. I think we all agree on that. Another thing that anyone that's done sales calls, especially even just the warm leads, right? The cold call, forget about it. But the warm leads, most prospects don't answer phone calls. Would you say that's agreeable?
Absolutely. I never answer my phone.
So we have these two things. It's difficult to find good salespeople, and most prospects don't answer phone calls. And my experience has been this leads to most people build systems that don't use salespeople. So there's either one or two categories, right? One, like you said, where they throw everything on the salesperson. That's usually not an Infusionsoft user. And then there's the other side where, because it's so difficult to find good salespeople, and because many prospects don't answer phone calls, many people end up leaning heavily on marketing and don't have salespeople at all. Does that sound fair? Like, is that an accurate portrayal?
Yeah, I think that's definitely accurate.
Cindy made a comment here. She said, yes, clients ask if we do sales calls for them. So I think that's one of those symptoms that kind of tells you, oh, there is a problem going on here. The problem, we want to get to the bottom of that. I think on the other hand, we can all agree that sales teams do accelerate and increase profits. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
And so if sales teams accelerate and increase profits, but yet these two things that we have in orange cause so much trouble that most people won't go through if they don't already have a working sales team, most people don't want to even use salespeople. And it's not because they're not profitable. Everybody would agree that sales teams can accelerate and increase profits. I think it's probably why, Cindy, people are asking you if you'll do sales calls for them, because they know they're important. We all know that. And if we do have an effective sales team, it's usually made up of good salespeople. Now, there's also got to be good sales systems. I probably should inject that in there, but you also are thinking, hey, I got to have some good salespeople to make a good sales team. And if you are going to be a good salesperson, you must sell, right? It's not good enough just to have because have you not run across a team or an organization that had salespeople that weren't actually selling? They're going through the motions maybe, or mildly going through the motions, but yet they weren't selling. So to be a good salesperson, you must sell, and to sell, you must have conversations with interested prospects. Is this all fair so far?
Absolutely. And I think, that part you were just talking about stops right there with the conversations. Sometimes you have a great sales rep who has great conversations. Actually, maybe they're not a great sales rep. They're a really good conversationalist. They get like 90% of the way there, but they struggle with the closing part. So then they're not the great salesperson that they need to be, but they're so close. They just like to talk.
Yeah. So we do have to have the ability to know how to invite people to take action. But one of the things that I found is that to have a sale, you have to have a conversation. You can't just have a conversation, though, to your point. But to have conversations, you have to call prospects. And I've seen a number of sales teams where the salesperson is not connecting and having sales conversations. And then I guess to your point, what would be even worse is if they are having those conversations and they're not closing.
Mm-hmm.
But in order for a good salesperson to close, they do have to have conversations. And in order to have conversations, they have to call prospects. But then they run into this thing that we all know, which is most prospects don't answer phone calls. And because of this, there's a high failure rate on calls. And so it's pretty demoralizing to call 100 people and talk to, 5 to 10. Have you ever had to do that, or do you usually push that to somebody else like I do?
Yeah, I don't do the sales job. Sorry.
There's a reason, isn't there?
It's tough. It's really hard. Yeah, and that demoralization is real. Yeah, when you make so many calls and you only connect with a few, and then if the majority of those say no, yeah, it's rough. You got to be the right kind of person to be able to do that all day long.
Which is the next point. It takes a special kind of person to be a successful salesperson.
For sure.
Someone that has to face a ton of rejection, a ton of failure, like getting voicemail after voicemail after voicemail, and keep pushing forward. And so we come full circle. It's difficult to find good salespeople because they're a special kind of person. And so most people don't end up building sales teams. They don't build systems that utilize the sales team. They try and use other ways to do it. But we all know, again, coming back full circle, that sales teams accelerate increased profits. So we have this problem, and this problem is exacerbated by assumptions that we all make about what's going on when most prospects don't answer the phone calls. That leads to the demoralization being even more intense, which is we think for most prospects that don't answer, they're not interested. Would you say that's a fair guess?
Yeah.
Most of us, oh, they didn't answer, they're probably just not interested. But interestingly enough, uh, this assumption is wrong, that we think, oh, they recognize the number and the reason for the call and they don't answer.
Mm-hmm.
So we say they must not be interested. And that's tough if you're like, hey, I'm excited about what we do. I want this person to be able to be excited about it and say yes, but it seems like everybody is uninterested. But there's three main reasons I've identified. And one is legitimately that some people are not interested, right? They were interested at the time that they filled out the form or they did something, but they weren't actually interested enough that they want to talk to a salesperson. That could be that they're not interested yet, or they're just not interested at all once they learned a little bit more. That is a real condition. The thing that's not 100% accurate is that they recognize the number and the reason for the call. If you look at a phone call, one of the interesting things about phone calls is they don't announce what the topic is. And often people don't recognize the number calling them. Would you say that's a common reason that you guys that are here attending, as well as you, Tyler, that you don't answer calls? Just because you don't know how long is this going to take? What's the topic? Or who's calling me?
Yeah, all of those reasons, right? I actually received a call right before this webinar that I wanted to take. I recognized the number. I want to talk to the guy really bad, but I didn't have time, right? And that would be a call that I would normally answer.
Yeah.
But the ones that I normally don't answer, yeah, 99% of the time it's I don't recognize the number. So I just don't answer.
Yeah. So and you brought this up. And the funny thing is we didn't, we didn't coordinate anything about what I was going to teach today, did we?
Nope.
But you said calls have an undetermined length of time. I don't know how long that call is going to take. That's part of the reason why people don't answer numbers that they don't recognize. The other part is that uncertainty causes anxiety. And even if they did answer, that anxiety is not good for real sales, right? Now, anxiety is actually good for a certain type of sale. We call it the hustle. Have you ever been hustled, Tyler?
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's probably one of the things that causes me the most anxiety about going to large cities is the approach and the hustle. You know, they throw you off, and then in that situation where you're feeling off kilter, they take advantage of the fact that your brain is no longer working because you're now into reptilian mode, as they say, and then they can do all sorts of stuff to you that you would
So
never.
Ryan, here's a little tip next time that happens.
Yeah.
Just turn it around and hustle them.
For some reason, I'm never prepared to do that. So.
Just it doesn't matter. You don't have to be prepared. Just pull something out of your pocket and start selling it to them.
I'll have to give that a try. I usually try to avoid that situation just because I don't like it. But in the same manner, right? This is why a lot of people don't answer the phone when they don't recognize the number. It's because they don't know how long is this call going to take? What is it about? You know, all that uncertainty creates a certain amount of anxiety that people then avoid answering the call in the first place. So again, while there is a segment of, especially when we're dealing with warm leads, that will not answer because they're not interested, a vast majority of them simply do it because they don't recognize the phone number calling them and because they don't know what's going to be going on. The other thing is that's more common than not interested is that they're busy and don't have time. So that was kind of your situation with this call. In this case, you did recognize the number. You did want to talk to the person, but because you didn't know how long the call was take and you knew that you didn't have time right now, you ended up not answering.
Yep.
So it had nothing to do with the interest level. And the way that I discovered that these three things were the case, and that most of them happen to fall in the last two, they don't recognize the number or they're busy and they don't have time, is when we started doing what we're going to talk about today. Suddenly we were able to get the feedback from people. And as a result, we were able to discover that most people actually did want to talk to us. They just, because of these barriers that are in place, they weren't answering the phone. And so we're going to show you today how you actually can get around that. But when people are busy and they don't have time, it's because calls don't announce their purpose, right? Like if it was different, if you could have a little pre-recorded message that when you called, instead of it ringing or vibrating, it would show the purpose of the call, a lot more people would answer, or at least communicate with you that they would like to talk to you, but they can't talk to you now. And so the prospect, because they don't know the purpose of the call, they don't know how long it's going to be, they can't evaluate the value of the call. And as people, we tend to spend our time on what we perceive to be valuable. And so this is the big challenge that we're facing. If you look at this overall, this is the big challenge that we have when we're trying to place phone calls to warm leads. Is there's so much going on that's fighting against our success, and as a result create other unintended consequences. If most people answered the phone, it wouldn't take as special of a person to deal with that high failure rate, because they would be having so many conversations. Now we just have to work on getting them to close better, right? Because we're getting them conversations, but when it takes so long to get a conversation, that's really tough on people. So again, that unintended consequence of it takes a special person to be a successful salesperson, so it's difficult to find them, and so we don't build teams, is actually based on the fact that most people don't answer the phone. So if we can change that, we can actually relieve a lot of stress, maybe hire a little bit differently, and help our salespeople to have more success with less effort if we can get them to answer the phone. So that's kind of the big hinge that we're here, is how do we get prospects actually to answer phone calls? Now, if somebody is not interested, that's a marketing problem. Usually that's what we would say, wouldn't we?
Absolutely.
That we're either attracting the wrong person or we're not communicating what it is that we bring to the market clear enough that they're like, yeah, I want to talk to somebody about this. So that's usually a marketing problem on the not interested side. So we're not really going to focus too much on that. But I want you to know that not interested can be resolved as well, because either we're attracting the wrong people or we're not telling them the right story in the marketing side of things, so that they're set up to have that conversation, like you said, to basically take an order is what we want to get the salesperson to. Um, this is also could be like if you are calling a list that you bought, that could be a list buyer's problem. And normally, when a salesperson thinks that not interested is the dominant reason people aren't answering, then this is what's going on in their head. They're thinking, well, these leads are crap. And how many times, if you had any salespeople, have you ever heard that?
That's always the case. When it's not going well, they always want to blame marketing or blame the leads for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, and if your perception is that they're not, that most people not answering are not answering because they're not interested, all of these things are natural consequences of that. So, the person that's buying a list goes to buy a different list, but maybe that's not all the problem at all. And so hopefully if you do have a sales team and they are struggling and they tend to tell you the leads aren't good and stuff, this right here, this part of the presentation is a great place to talk and have a discussion and show, because it helps them to recognize that maybe there's another reason people aren't answering. And if you can address that, then they can give those leads a second chance that maybe they've been giving up on, or they can get more stamina out of the situation because they're going to find, oh, there's actually more to this than I thought. People are interested, but there's other barriers that are preventing them from connecting with me. And if we can work on those barriers, actually now we've got a shot at this whole thing. So like I put these buy different list and change ads because this is usually what people do because of the assumption that they have that not interested is the reason that the leads aren't converting. And usually that's not the case at all. And so that's good information, because if it's those things, those are tougher problems to solve than the problem I'm going to show you. So if it is really the fact, and the cool part is you don't have to trust me on any of this, beyond just trying it out. If you just try it out within a day or two, you should know if what I'm saying is true or not, because the results will be different. So let's go ahead and look at this problem of most prospects don't answer the phone, and these two reasons that we have actually a lot more control over than we realize. So the first one being don't recognize the phone number calling them. So the number one objective here is and this is what most people do, and we're going to talk about why what they do actually creates a bigger problem than they thought. But what most people do is when they see this problem, because there are many people that recognize this problem, wouldn't you say? That's not like I said anything groundbreaking. Tyler, don't you know that people don't answer the phone when they don't recognize the number?
Absolutely.
And do you not know that when people are busy, they don't answer the phone?
Yep.
Okay, so these aren't new things. There are people that have worked on these problems in the past. So the objective number one is I can only control the number of calls made. Therefore, I must make as many calls as I can in the shortest period of time possible. This is how they deal with this problem of people don't recognize the phone number calling them. Okay. The other one is if I can get people to answer the phone, if they think the call is from a local number, then I can solve this problem as well. And there are studies. Have you ever accidentally answered a call you wouldn't have answered because it was in your same area code?
No, but it does make me think twice, or I should say it has made me think twice. And then
Yeah.
my next thought is, those idiots are just using a local number to get my attention.
That's because you know that, right? And I know
Right.
that too. And yet, even I've answered the phone a couple of times. I'm
Right.
just like, well, maybe.
Maybe it's someone I know. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're playing on that, and that's why studies actually. This is so objective two that people trying to go after is actually based on something very real. Objective one is just a purely mathematical approach to things, right? And that the solution to that is what's called robodials, and a robodial is where you will have a phone calling system dial, 3, 5, 8 numbers at once, looking for the first connection. So what they're saying is, since people don't answer the phone unless they recognize the number, but there is some percentage that do, we'll just make more calls in less time in order to overcome this barrier. And so that's where the robodial was invented. So because it calls, 5 to 8 people at once, as soon as one of them connects, then software will then connect that person to the salesperson. But there are some negative unintended consequences with the solution. One is most people get an empty call from your number. So if you do call 8 people and one person answers, that doesn't mean that there's no more people, that the other 7 didn't answer. It just means they didn't answer before the first one. And so they end up getting an empty line. They don't get automatically connected to another sales rep. They get an empty line and a hang up. That's not good. It kind of builds people into not wanting to answer the phone further. Um, the signal that the call is an unknown sales call, is that fact that boom, it showed up and then dropped off. So that the fact that you see that number show up and then drop off, have you ever had that happen? Where a call
Oh, yeah.
starts and then it stops? That's
Mhm.
probably because you were part of a robo dial. And that kind of sends a signal reinforcing, I bet that was a sales call. I'm not going to answer that one again. Um, when the salesperson is actually connected on a robo dial, typically there could be up to a 2 to 5 second delay from when the prospect started talking to when the salesperson connects. Because, and the reason this happens is because software has a hard time knowing if voicemail picked up or if a human picked up. And so they have to do a little detection. That can take like under a second, but by the time that gets connected to the salesperson is actually able to speak. There is an awkward pause. If you've ever answered a sales call that was part of a robodial, you've experienced this. But I know my brother who used to do sales for Visa, he said because they used a robodial system, it was the worst thing in the world. It created super anxiety for the salesperson because you didn't know when the call was going to connect, but when it did, you knew they were already going to be sitting there saying hello, hello for a couple of seconds. And so it was a high anxiety place to start from for the salesperson. Um, and because of that high anxiety state, it really wears you down over the long run, which again goes back to the problems that we were trying to avoid in the first place, which is having to have a super special person in order to have a successful salesperson. So there's all these unintended negative consequences that come with the robodial. Now, I personally have a philosophical issue with it, which is why we never did it at Fix Your Funnel. But there's also all these other consequences that go along with it. There's also that little issue of if you're robodialing mobile phone numbers, that's against the law in the United States. Just a teeny issue. But unless you are a politician, then you're fine to do it anytime. So the objective two was that using the local area code. And so there are all sorts of services. We've had people pressure us big time to try and add this, where they have a pool of numbers, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 in every area code. And when you place a call, instead of that call coming from your phone number, quote unquote, it comes from one of these pooled numbers and matches up the area code with the phone number that you're dialing. And so that's that. And there's other ways people do this. They'll actually buy a phone number in every area where they have a prospect, and they'll have their own pool of numbers that they use, so they're not shared. Both of these have pluses and minuses, but overall, I consider them to be bigger minuses because the study actually was done at one point in time and was accurate. But the more that people do this process of calling from local area codes, the more it trains prospects not to answer calls from local area codes, right? And then on top of that, it's using this little deception to start a conversation of trust. And the salesperson must convince then the deceived prospect to invest an uncertain amount of time in a sales call. So all these things, just because the basis of it, I think, end up being more negative than positive. And I'll just throw these things up there that we talked about in the previous slide. The fact that calls have an undetermined length of time, the uncertainty, and then also the anxiety. All those things are not good for sales. And so the ultimate question that I would have for anybody watching is, do these solutions address the core issue? Do they resolve the problem of the person not recognizing the phone number to calling them? And then the other question I have for you is, do these solutions make the core issue worse? What are your thoughts, Tyler?
Yeah, they don't address the core issue, and they do make it worse for sure.
So, that's the fascinating part. When we start trying to find solutions to core problems, the first thing we have to do is make sure we're real clear on the core problem and that our solution actually addresses it. So if the core problem is people don't recognize phone numbers calling them, then whatever solution we do end up coming up with has to address that core issue. Otherwise, what is it doing, right? Cindy made a comment over here. She said she had a client that made robo dialer software. Well, that's tough. And I didn't feel great about it because I'm so annoyed by receiving them. That was my philosophical challenge with it in the first place myself. And it must be illegal because they use a random number. Okay, well, yeah. I just don't think it's anything about that's positive. Okay, so there we go. That's the whole thing with the recognizing the phone number to call them, right? So since we did identify the core problem and some of the characteristics that create that situation for both not recognizing the phone number and busy and don't have time, right? And if you look at the blue boxes, I just pulled those over from the previous slide we were on. This isn't like a brand new concept. We had the calls don't announce their purpose, prospects can't evaluate the value of the call, and people spend time on what they perceive to be valuable. So the busy and don't have time and also don't recognize the phone number are both being addressed by these 6 blue boxes in terms of those are the things that we kind of want to watch out for. So how do we have more conversation with interested prospects? And the first step is we have to secure mobile phone numbers. Now, the reason for mobile phone numbers is because of number 2, which is we got to secure permission to text. We want to be texting. Texting is actually the secret formula for being able to have more conversations with interested prospects. And it's not that we text instead of call, because if you remember from, I believe it was last week, we talked about different mediums and their strengths and minuses. The phone call is by far superior for sales. But starting phone calls is the big hang up. So we got to figure out how, oh, that was a play on words, wasn't it? We got to get around that and have it so people want to answer the phone. So we have these 2 prerequisites are really important because we want to be able to text them. So we have to secure the phone numbers when we're getting the leads, and we also have to secure permission to text when we're getting the leads. And we talked last week about a few ways that you can go about doing that. So go back to next week. That replay should be available today. And then it's this easy. Before you call, you send a single text. I think this became, what year did this become etiquette for personal interaction, Tyler?
I don't know.
When did you have to start texting somebody before you called them?
I don't know. Sometime in the last 2 or 3 years, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty common. Like, it's so bad that even on my own team, before my developers will call me, they'll send me a chat message. Hey, can I call you? And I usually don't see those when I'm in focus mode because I get super hyper focused when I'm working on a project. So I'm like, just call me. It's okay. I know it's 2020 and that's not proper etiquette, but go ahead and just call me because we work on the same team. I'm open to taking your call. Just call me. But for everybody else, we do kind of have to send this text, especially if we know they don't have our phone number, right? So you might not do that with your friends and family that you're close with, because they're already going to have your number and name in their phone book. But if you met someone recently, you had a good relationship formed, but you don't know if they have your number in their phone, are you going to send a text before you call? Probably, right? Just because if you want them to answer, you got to make sure they recognize your number. So the same thing is true for warm leads, okay? This is what you've got to do. The first thing you've got to do is tell them who you are, which for a lot of salespeople, this is pretty tough because if they believe that most people are not answering the phone because they're not interested, initially it's very difficult for them to go, well, then why would I tell them who I am? Then maybe they will for sure not answer because they know that I'm calling. But not only will you tell them who you are, you're going to tell them why you will be calling. And if you look at our little chart with our little blue boxes here, you can see why that's important, right? Because phone calls don't announce their purpose, we have to announce the purpose with the text. Because the person doesn't recognize the number, we have to tell them who we are so that they will be able to associate a name or company with that phone number. And then we want to invite them to text a response, not because we have to have the response, but if they do, it unlocks some doors that we're going to talk about in just a minute. So number 3 is almost more optional, but I'll show you how I go about doing that right here. So I'm going to text them and say, hi, James. I like to do something personal so it shows that I know who they are. I'm not just a random person. So if you are generating a lead, this makes it much more personal. This kind of accesses into that psychology of a human-to-human interaction. This is Janet, period. That period is really important. I'll get to why in just a second. You may say, well, I want to say this is Janet from, well, in this case, I'm showing Yeti text, but normally I'd say fix your funnel there. But, this is Janet, and you might want to say, hey, this is Janet from Fix Your Funnel. Well, you might want to do that, but there's a reason why we have to do it this way. So you say, this is Janet, period. I'll be calling you shortly from name of company to talk about using or talk about purpose for your call, is now a good time. Now, the is now a good time is a great way to elicit a text response, because they can tell yes or no. Whether they do respond or not, we're still going to go forward with the phone call. But this is what we're going to send before we actually make the phone call. Now, as far as how we do it internally, what we'll normally do is before the salesperson's about to start phone calls, they'll pick the first two people they're going to call on their list, and they'll send the text about 5 minutes before they start making their calls. This gives the person time to receive the text and respond if they're going to do that before we actually attempt the call. Then before each next subsequent call, we're sending a couple more. So we keep the kind of the line going. This does a couple of things for your salesperson, especially if you have an explicit rule about how they have to do this. One is it's kind of priming the pump for them psychologically. They know, hey, I've made a commitment to these people that I'm going to call them. I have to call these next few people. So it kind of creates this momentum thing, which is cool. But more importantly, it addresses these two core concerns that we have that keep people from answering the phone, which is they don't recognize the phone number and they don't have time. So a way that you can enhance this just one step further, which unfortunately only works in the US and Canada right now, is you could attach an image of the salesperson. And what this does for the whole process is this now puts a face with a number and a name. And that makes this person who's trying to communicate with the lead human. So no longer is this just this cold, hard machine trying to extract money out of them. This is actually a person trying to connect with them about a problem that they actually have. And so this dramatically changes the impact of your phone calls and the likelihood of someone, one, answering, because now they have an association of a face with it. If you know anything about the way the brain works, it's very visual in general. We actually picture a lot of the things that we think we just imagine with, without the pictures, but we picture a lot of things. So putting a face with a phone number and a name really enhances the humanity of the situation, which is what we want for the salesperson, right? As a salesperson, you're trying to connect with somebody. And when I first came across somebody using something similar to this, I was surprised at how much trust was immediately created in the situation, just simply because I had those three things. I had this identifier, the phone number, a name, and a face pulled together. And that made a huge difference in my openness to even receiving the phone call in the first place. So this is really critical. So this is the format, this is the formula that you want to do.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions here. One is, have you guys tested that kind of 5-minute period? Have you ever tested, hey, I'll call you in 15 minutes, that type of thing, maybe give them a little chance to step out of whatever meeting they're in or wrap up?
No, we haven't. And so you could try that to get even, if you we just did this without the picture, to be honest. We just did the text and not, like you're saying, very thoughtful about some things, just start doing it. We personally in office saw a quadrupling of our conversation rate when we did it. So that's 400% greater connection, meaning, and I'll explain what I mean by connection rate, because some people are at first surprised by it. We have a user, Brent, who posted a video recently, and in his video, he said, I didn't change anything, right? I didn't change our script, our sales, nothing. I just did this pre-call text, and we call it pre-call SMS. And what you do inside of Fix Your Funnel is you actually just write one up, and then you just push a button. It's not like you're having to copy and paste this thing. You just push a button, send pre-call SMS. Whichever one you have selected, at that time is the one that will send out. And so you're not even thinking very much about it. You're just click, 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 click. And so I'm sure there's ways to optimize this, to your point. But without optimizing, we saw quadrupling. Without optimizing, and I don't know what his message was that he sent out. I'm assuming he followed these guidelines because it was on the cheat sheet that I gave to him. But he saw a doubling of the conversations they were having. So you had another question? Because you said you had a couple.
Well, I think you answered it. I was going to ask if you had tested with or without the picture as well, and if you know that for sure increases response.
So Cindy has a question. Do you use text in advance for all B2B too? Well, that's what we are. So yeah. Remember, at the end of everything is person to person, right? It's one human connecting with another human. That's what sales ultimately is. And understanding a situation and then giving a recommendation that matches the needs of the person. And so when we do these things right here, this dramatically enhances the response of the person you're going to call. Now, interestingly enough, and I'm going to get into this iOS 13 block unknown callers, which Cindy, I think you've also mentioned. Cindy, you're the talkative one today because I'm only referencing you. You'd think you're the only one on. But Cindy, okay, good. See, everybody, other people are here. They're chatting in now. But you mentioned that you use the block unknown callers. I do too, because I just don't want to be bothered with calls from numbers I don't recognize. And that feature is a feature of iOS 13. Android, I'm told, has had this for years, which is always the case in some other format. But I'm going to show you how you can overcome the block unknown callers for prospects, which most people don't even know this is happening to them as they're calling warm leads. They're like, wow, it's weird. Our numbers have really gone down. Or they're like, yeah, it seems like nobody's even interested. No one's answering the call. What they don't know is software is making it so the prospect isn't even seeing the call. But there's some things that will unlock. You can get bypass the block unknown callers thing if you do a few things, which I'll show you in just a moment. But one of the things we noticed when we started doing this initially is that we had a few different outcomes. One is people would just not answer the phone at all. Okay, well, that was already happening, so no big deal. We started getting text messages back from people that said, hey, I'm busy right now, but can we talk at 3? Well, fantastic. Is there anything better for a salesperson than have a fixed period of time to talk to a person? Much prefer to have an appointment, right? Over just, catching them at a weird time where maybe there's other things that are distracting them. So we found that to happen. The other thing that would happen is that people would say, oh, I'm so glad you're going to be calling. I've been looking forward to it. Well, that was weird. Other people would just answer the call. And so suddenly our salesperson seemed a lot more chipper and upbeat because they realized, oh, people actually do want to talk to me. They're not avoiding me like I have the plague. What's really going on is that they just didn't know who I was or they were busy. And those were the two more common outcomes. And so because of that, some people will not text you at all. They'll just answer, like I said, but there's a number of people that may even start engaging in a texting conversation. So this creates another issue you got to watch out for if you let your salespeople start to use texting and calling their leads, is you have to make sure that they don't convert just to texting. Because we caught a couple of our salespeople moving just to texting because it was so much more effective. They didn't bother to make the phone calls. They just would send out the text, the person would respond, they'd start going back and forth, and pretty soon they'd close the deal via text. That will happen, but you have to make sure that the salesperson doesn't think that is the only thing that should happen. So that's just kind of a warning there for you that do start using this in your process if you're already making sales calls. So to overcome the block unknown callers, and Tyler, by the way, if you have any concerns or questions about anything I've said, just knock me over. And
I'll jump in, don't worry.
Okay. Get Siri to associate the name with the number is the first thing you've got to do to overcome block unknown number. In order to do this, you have to deal with Siri, which anyone that has an iPhone knows Siri is extremely stupid. While it's a very useful tool in some respects, it is also very basic. And so after doing a ton of testing, what we found is in order to get Siri to associate a name with a number, you have to use almost just this sentence. This is Janet. By using that sentence early on in the text, like if you didn't personalize it, I like to personalize it. And so that's why I put the hi James at the beginning. But you can't let it go much further than that before you say this is Janet, because then Siri will miss it. They'll get confused and it won't recognize it. The other option you can do is you can put the little dash and then your full name at the end of a text. That to me feels a little bit awkward, so that's why I generally don't recommend or teach it. But if you do that, it will associate the full name to the phone number as well. So the dash, you've all seen that, right? Tyler, is that making sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so if you do that, that will also allow Siri to do it. So one of the things you may want to do now going forward is if you've ever seen something where it says maybe and then the name of the person, then you've seen Siri associating a name with a number. Go look at the message that the person texted you to see why that happened. And then that will allow you to know, some of the options you may have beyond what I'm telling you here. But this for sure works. So that's why I'm pretty explicit about it.
Hey, Ryan, what about, this is Janet from Yeti Text. I'll be calling you shortly. Does
Yeah,
that
as soon as you add the from, it gets confused.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because that's my knack. In fact, that's how I used to send this pre-call SMS.
Right.
Is I put the name from company, and that's what I used to teach. But once we got this iOS 13 complication in here, then we were like, well, okay, let's see what works, and we've done a lot of testing. Um,
Interesting.
so that I know for sure works. Go look at when you see Siri, because Siri is also evolving. So it could be down the road that Siri does recognize this is Janet from company name. But you got to see it working before you start modifying your own messages to match that. Okay. So there's two parts to overcoming it. Um, the first part is you have to get Siri to associate the name. The other is they either have to call your number first. So if they've never called your number, then there's no interaction from them, or they have to text your number. So if they called or texted your number and Siri has an association, or you're in their contact book. Now, if you're in their contact book, then you bypass everything, because that's what iOS is assuming. If someone's in the contact book, they must be a trusted contact. So, your doctor, stuff like that, you want to make sure they're in there if you don't want to miss a call from your doctor, something like that. And so that's why the iOS 13 blocked unknown callers is unknown, meaning it's not in your contact book. So that's a pretty tough thing to do, to get somebody to add your V card or your contact card into their phone. It's something that we do try and we kind of teach a little bit, but I know it's not realistic this early on in the relationship to get somebody to do that. So that's why we have to go for these two. These two will work in place of being in the contact book. So the Siri association of the name with the number, and it's not a full name, it's not your business name, it's just a name. And it does get confused by business's name versus human names. So when you use machine learning or artificial learning, if you've done any work with them, Tyler, I know you like to geek out on stuff. Have you tried using any of these natural language processor engines to do things?
I haven't.
Okay, well, if you do, what you find is that they actually have trained machine learning to recognize human names. And so that's why, Janet, this is Janet, that structure is what it's looking for. That's why it works so reliably. But if you start throwing in, fix your funnel, this is fix your funnel. It's like, now fix is not a name, your is not a name, funnel is not a name. Those are all, verbs and nouns and pronouns. None of that is going to be something it's going to associate with the phone number. So don't try and break the rule, just kind of stick with it. And then for the response, I asked the natural question of, is now a good time? Because if it's not a good time, we're going to elicit that response, which is great. Let's find out when the good time is. If it is a good time, some people will say yes. That tells you quite a bit about a person that responds at all, right? They're like, oh, good, I want to interact with you. And so now when you call, not only has the action of the contact met, kind of signaled to the operating system on the smartphone that you are someone they want to communicate with, but they're also doing it psychologically. So we're getting a 2-for-1 essentially with this. So does that all make sense?
Totally.
Okay. We got a couple questions that came in. I noticed in your auto conversations, you don't ask in a way that benefits for questions like, what is your name? What is your email address? You don't ask in a way that benefits for questions. I'm not sure I understand that. Do you, Tyler? Are you reading that question? Like I ask, what is your name? And what is your email address?
Oh,
Okay. I see what you're saying. You're saying that to get Siri to auto prompt the answer. Yeah, you can do that. That's fine. I usually don't worry too much about it when I'm asking for name. Email address, would probably be worth doing that in auto convos. You're just getting off on the fact that Siri will pop up information. Yeah, if you simplify it, you do get more of that leverage out of the smartphone. I tend not to, just because I'm not thinking about it, but that's a good thing to do, Devin. I wouldn't discourage you from doing that at all. Okay. Very good. Okay. Oh, okay. That's what I was doing. Sorry. That's going to be a long. Okay. So what I was pointing out with these arrows is, again, to reinforce, I'm telling you who I am. This is Janet. And then why am I calling? To talk about using texting in your business. So when you understand these things, now this is it. So this one's kind of disappointing. I'm not going to go 15 minutes longer talking about this because that's it. I already beat this horse to death. That's the thing, and that's why I said you can implement this today. Like if you have salespeople calling, you could say, "Hey, go ahead and send a text before you call." Boom, done. And the text formula isn't difficult either. It's this is your name, period. I'll be calling you shortly from company name to talk about whatever it is you're going to call about. Is now a good time? Add the image to it for an extra, for an extra bonus in terms of response, and now you're golden. You can literally set this up in 5 minutes. This isn't like you have to think really hard, like, well, what's the benefit I'm going to talk about? And what's the offer? This is what I'm calling about. Is now a good time. That's it. And then immediately see the difference in terms of response, because now we're addressing these two core issues. Instead of doing these other things that really don't address the core issue, we can actually start hitting the core issue. But again, the only caveat in this whole thing is you do need to get mobile phone numbers and you need secure permission to text them. Once you have those two things though, now, in which you should be doing anyways, just because it gives you more options. Again, marketing rule number 19, know how you're going to sell before you decide how to lead capture. If you take all these things into consideration, you can be much more effective with the same money. Like Brent said, he didn't spend any more on ads. He didn't run a new ad. He wasn't doing anything different. He had just paid attention to what I taught him before, which is get mobile phone numbers and permission to text. So he was already doing that. So when he added in this thing, boom, doubling of sales. That's kind of a good thing in most walks of life, right? So any questions that come up for anybody else? Or, to your point, Tyler, anything you want to say?
I have a question about just how you do this functionally with Fix Your Funnel. I'm assuming, if I'm doing this with Fix Your Funnel, then the phone calls are happening through Fix Your Funnel, of course, because you want it to all happen on the same phone number.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, because I've seen lots of people that try to text and call from different numbers, and they're surprised that they don't get the result.
Right. So I haven't used the dialer function personally in quite some time. I'm curious, can you do that through the mobile app? Can I call through the mobile app, or do I need to be sitting at my desktop calling through the desktop computer?
Yeah, for this feature, I mean, obviously you can place a phone call through our mobile app, and you can send a text to a contact through the mobile app. The challenge you're going to find with the mobile app is we don't have the ability to pull up lists at the current moment. That's something we're talking about, we're working on. We're just trying to figure out the best way to user interface, create that situation.
I mean, most sales reps are going to be sitting at their desk anyways. It's not a big deal. I was just curious.
Yeah, so that's for your curiosity. That's semi-doable, but I wouldn't think it would be the ideal, because you'd have to be looking up contacts on some basis, and that just makes it kind of cumbersome.
Yeah, and you don't need any additional like VoIP system or anything, right? You just hook up your headset to your computer and start the
headset, internet connection, computer. You're ready to make phone calls.
Right.
I think we've got people working off
super simple
everything. But yeah, so inside of the user interface,
Cindy's got a question here. Getting mobile phone numbers to start using Spiffy for small orders, but right now they don't have a field for mobile phone. I hope they add it. How can I get past that issue?
Hunter's a good dude. I would just press on him hard. I bet they can.
We still on, Ryan?
Yeah. Can you not hear me?
Hello.
Let's see here.
I don't know if Ryan's still on or if I.
Okay. Yeah, I'm still on. Okay. Well, Cindy and Devin can both hear us. Okay. Yeah. Hunter's a good dude. I'd press hard on him. That's what I would do. I'd press hard on him so that he will make that happen, because if you just tell him, hey, look, I've got to go somewhere else, or I need mobile, he'll make it happen for you. Yeah, and the point I was going back to on the actual Fix Your Funnel itself, if you're in the dial, you pick your list, you'll notice on there'll be a pre-call SMS. It may not show up until you create one, which you can do in the top bar, but you just will want to write up your message, follow this format. You can merge in the name. You can have a default if the name isn't there for our pre-call SMS, and then boom, away you go. And it'll be awesome.
So, hey, Ryan, someone must have tripped on the router cable or something.
Oh, did you get disconnected?
Yeah, so I'm back. I was trying to bring your attention to a question from Cindy. Did you already handle that one?
Yeah, we did.
Okay. All right, cool.
Okay, regarding text before call. Yeah, so if you're just calling an individual person, that's one thing, Cindy. Because so Cindy's question was, we have the mobile phone app. Should we use that or should we use desktop? And it really comes down to, are we calling a list of prospects or are we calling a single prospect? If we're calling a single prospect, like you only have a few of them, you can still use this. I would just go ahead and use my phone if I was in that scenario. But if I'm calling a list of prospects, I want to get on the desktop. Tyler, do you have any thoughts on that?
That makes total sense to me. That's probably how I would do it.
And I'm not sure if I'm understanding your comment here, Cindy, but it sounds like you're saying you're using the same login for the app on our phones. You should have multiple team members. We don't charge for team members at Fix Your Funnel. And the reason I don't do that, because there's a lot of people that do charge, per user seat and stuff like that, is I know that the way that people are charged impacts their behavior. And it's not great behavior to have one login shared amongst multiple people, especially when it comes to texting and the conversations and the transparency that we want to have internally for who's talking with who about what. So what I highly recommend is that you incorporate, every team member should have their own team member login is what I should say. So do that. We don't charge you extra for team member logins. We did have a short stint. If you're one of those people that's still paying us for some reason, let us know. We'll stop charging you. But you should be able to create as many team members as you need and have everybody have their own login. That login works for the desktop dialer and for the smartphone, of course. Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, just make sure you're doing that. We want to support good behavior, and having everybody on your team have their own team member login is best behavior. All right, any other questions that come up? And I see there's a couple messages that were in our Facebook Live. Someone said, or Lauren said, this is why you don't answer your phone. Lauren, you did call before. It was the same kind of situation that Tyler was talking about. I didn't know how long that call was going to go, and I was in the middle of doing some preparation. So anyways. And then there's a couple people asking, they got in late. They're wondering if they can get the replay. Yeah, I will post the replay. Of course, this Facebook Live is right there, so you can just watch it there. Okay. Well, and if no other questions, then we'll end a few minutes early. Do you see any others? I don't see any others.
No, sounds good. This is great, Ryan. Thank you.
Yeah, my real hope for everybody that was on today is that as you go back and you think about this whole dilemma, that you now have a little more confidence that one, you should definitely show this training to your salespeople. Let them bring up concerns that maybe I didn't address. Pop those into the comments, because your salespeople have to be on the same page with you. They have to recognize that most of the people they're calling that aren't answering are not in this not interested category. They are in the don't recognize the phone number and busy. But that, if you put this into place and you teach them all of this, then what will happen is the natural consequences, they'll see it in the results. When people start texting them back, when people start answering that weren't answering before, when they start getting past the block unknown callers, and so people that didn't even know they were calling now see it, you're just going to get better results across the board. Do they have to reply as a question? Yeah, they have to. So these are the two characteristics. Siri has to make an association with the name and the number. That's what this is, Janet does. And then in order to overcome block unknown callers, they have to have either called or text you. So it's looking for both of those. So you may text them. This is why the call and text have to happen on the same phone number. Because if they text back to you and then you call from a separate number, you don't get through. It's got to be the same number. So Siri's got to make the association, which we're making happen through the text with that format. And then they have to respond in order for us to overcome block unknown callers. So that's why your question, is now a good time, but you may ask a different question. Whatever it is, you're just trying to elicit some sort of text response, because once that happens, now you can get through.
So they don't have to click that little link that says like add contact. When it says like, is this Steve? Add contact. You don't have to do that. They just have to respond.
Yep.
Okay. Cool.
We just need Siri to make the association, and then they respond. Those two things are all that they're looking for. So yeah, they don't have to tap the button and add your contact or anything like that. So that's the good news, is that they just need to respond. So that seems like a tough hurdle, but you know, it's that or nothing. So what are you going to do? You know what I mean?
Yep. In the Fix Your Funnel app or in the desktop version, I know you can do this through the automated text because I've done it. But can you attach a V card easily?
Um, you know, I'm embarrassed to say I don't know the answer off the top of my head on that, because there's things that we have on our roadmap. I'm just not sure if that one already got done.
Right.
That is something that we've had is having all of your media available to attach there
Yeah.
in your pre-call SMS, because we did have to add this image recently, so I think that V cards are there as well. But
Yeah.
here's an interesting side note, just to this whole discussion. If you generate the lead off of them texting a keyword to your phone number, they've already interacted with your phone number.
Yeah.
So if you are calling leads of people who have texted a keyword or had any other interaction with your phone number, that part's already been done. If you get the Siri unlocking in there, now you've already got it done. And so you don't even have to worry about getting the response. So a lot of it depends on, how you go about generating your leads too.
Yeah.
So that's good news for people that are.
Okay, here's a random question. How about
Yeah.
a pre-call ringless voicemail? Ever tried that?
Yeah, it just depends. The
Obviously, they
problem,
have to check their voicemail, and it's less likely they're going to check it than they see the text.
yeah, the
I get that.
voicemail is like we have users using ringless voicemail extensively, and so they're obviously getting some results off of it.
Uh-huh.
The benefit of voicemail today versus 10 years ago is that your smartphones are all transcribing that. So if you're enunciating clearly, you
Mm-hmm.
know, you are essentially getting this bigger text messages showing up in a less, with every medium, what you're looking for is how effectively can it deliver the message, right? We
Mm-hmm.
talked about that a couple of lessons ago. So we're just saying, how effectively can we deliver the message? And part of what makes it difficult to deliver a message is competition in the medium. So that's why ringless voicemail can be effective for people, is because there's a lot fewer people leaving voicemails. you know, there's not very many people making calls, and so if you can add these two mediums into, that can be effective. But as far as getting on the phone and have that phone call, if they, and this is why it's so important to use one number instead of thousands of numbers or hundreds of numbers when you're placing calls, is because if you do send that ringless voicemail and you say, "Oh, hey, sorry I missed you. Give me a call back, or go ahead and text me as soon as you get this, and topic why you should call." When that happens, and then they actually call you back and interact back with you via text, um, if that's on the same number with everything, now we've opened up all of our channels. And this is why it's disappointing to see so many people falling for the idea of using multiple phone numbers
Mm-hmm.
for stuff. And I've been surprised to even have some people that I greatly respect and recognize that was such a big deal. But that's why I appreciate you bringing that up as well, is because I take it for granted. I take it for granted that that you should use one phone number for calling and texting, because if you don't, there's so many things you miss out on. So